Welcome to the Afghanistan Project podcast. I'm your host, Beth Bailey, and today I'm excited to bring back a very familiar face, my good friend Andy Sullivan, the Chief Advocacy Officer for nonprofit organization No One Left Behind. We're excited to talk about updates with the Special Immigrant Visa Program, which is probably the most requested topic, honestly, on this podcast, is constantly to update on the SIV program, but really to look at what we know from the Trump administration and what happened in his last administration with the SIV program and what we can expect going forward now. Also, what's going on in that interim phase. So really just kind of an across-the-board look at the SIV program. Andy is an Erie, PA native, a graduate of the Virginia Military Institute, and for over 9 years he served as an infantry officer in the U.S. Army. He was deployed to Iraq, Eastern Europe, and Zabul, Afghanistan. And Andy has his master's in public policy from Harvard's Kennedy School of Government, which just, I feel like a peon in your presence, Andy. It's just so good to have you here. Thank you.
Well, Beth, the best thing about Harvard is that you don't have to respect anyone from Harvard anymore. That is, I tell people, and I truly mean it, like I respected it more before they let me in there. So do not feel like a peon. I am, as always, honored to be in your presence.
Oh man, it's so good. It's a mutual admiration society. I want to really let you talk. You are the expert on this. I think to start things off, I had intended to ask you about just what's going on now, how many SIVs are left, what the progress is. I actually had somebody send me an email the other day saying, hey, Congress just appropriated 15,000 new SIVs. I said, no, because I know the people who would be pounding pavement to get that to happen, and they haven't told me about it. That's not real. So, what is the status right now of the SIV program?
Great question, Beth. And, last time I think I joked that it was the driest 3 minutes on your podcast as I just read facts and figures off. You always have great guests. I am not going to be one of them here for the next 5 minutes, but we are going to be, number dense for folks that care.
I love it. I love numbers. Please.
Perfect. Well, okay. So for, as you know, and I think probably many of your listeners do, the quarterly reports that the State Department issues are really kind of a lagging indicator of what's going on. So we actually just had, I think it was about 2 weeks ago, quarter 3 of fiscal year 2024 come out. So that captures data as of June 30th. So that'll tell you where we are. We're already kind of basically nearly 5 months behind. But as of June 30th, there were 15,729 visas remaining. In that quarter, the State Department set a new record for processing visas, which is now, I believe, the third quarter in a row. We issued 1,894 visas. That's principal applicants. And then when you look at their family members, it was another over 6,000. So just under 8,000, it was 7,927 Afghan allies that were employed by or on behalf of the U.S. They made it to safety in those 3 months. Now, I'd said 15,729 was what we had as of June 30th. There has not been a new quarterly report, but one of the things we can do is we can look at monthly immigration statistics from State Department. So in July, they issued 566. In August, they issued 641. In September, they issued 612. Those are all principal visa numbers. We usually average about 4.2 dependents per principal case. Now, that is not holistic of the SIV program. Those are visas issued by State Department for folks that maybe arrived as part of the evacuation, part of the NEO in August of 2021. If they were issued a visa through USCIS, it would not be counted in those numbers from July, August, or September. So bottom line, we know that as of September 30th, the maximum amount of visas that we have would be 13,910. I think realistically, based on the throughput we have, we are somewhere below 13,000 now. My guess would be around 12,500. Now, what is that 12,500 trying to serve? That 12,500 is trying to serve 132,351 applicants. So, we are right now, we have roughly 10% of the visas needed to serve the applicants that are currently in the pipeline. This is one that's kind of concerning right here, Beth. There are 57,000 that are waiting on COM determination, and even more concerning than that, there are 11,238 principal applicants waiting on an interview, which means they're COM approved and waiting on an interview. So basically, we have damn near more COM approved people than we do visas remaining. So bottom line is there is still a lot of work for Congress to do to make sure that we have visas available.
Oh,
And to the listeners, I am so sorry for that.
Oh, I was all about that. That is perfectly distilled, because every time I have to write about this, I have to go into the quarterly reports and crunch the numbers, and I always want to like send you a message and go, is this right? Have I done the math properly? So thank you. You just did my math for like the next few months. That is really disturbing that, yeah, about 1,000 of the ones waiting on COM. And that's not even to mention all of the people who've just had COM revoked for no particular reason, and they were in that pipeline thinking that they were so close, and now they get to start all over, and will there even be a program? And I want to caution, because I've had people ask me about this recently too, so you can back me up and verify that I am correct here. The deadline for the SIV program isn't when it ends. That's just the application deadline. You have to send your application in by December 31st of 2025. So that's a long way off yet, correct?
You've stated it perfectly. That's absolutely correct.
If there is no SIV program at that point, there are no SIVs to get. So we have to push for, and I'm sure that's my next question for you. There aren't 15,000 on the table right now. Is there any chance of more before we have the new Congress come in?
The short answer is yes. So the way we have moved visas traditionally, the way that, really in the last, I think at least 4 years or so, has been through the appropriations process. So for those folks that maybe don't deal with this all the time, every year when we fund the governments, there are 12 appropriations bills. The one that funds the State Department, the State Foreign Operations and Related Programs Appropriations Act, has historically what carried new visa authorizations. It's also where we've extended the program. So for those listeners that maybe follow No One Left Behind, you know that one of our priority bills is the Afghan Allies Protection Act of 2023. That's a standalone bill. Realistically, unfortunately, Congress does not pass many standalone bills these days, and everything kind of gets packaged into must-pass legislation. The appropriations bills, the government funding bills being a must-pass piece of legislation. So the Senate actually moved that State Foreign Operations Related Programs Appropriations Act. I'll call it SFOPS just going forward. So they passed that SFOPS bill out of committee. It was passed on a bipartisan basis, very robustly supported. It carries with it 20,000 additional Afghan SIVs and an extension of the Afghan SIV program. Unfortunately, the House, in their version, that one has passed out of committee. It does not carry any visas. So this happened last year, and last year, as the state and House, reconciled the differences in their bills, we ended up with 12,000. I think we're going to have something similar, this year. But I am optimistic. I mean, there is wide bipartisan support for additional visas, and so I'm optimistic that we're certainly going to push for 20,000. If we don't get it, I'm still optimistic that we're going to be able to get at least 12,000 to make sure we plus up.
Okay. What other things are you looking at? Well, you know what? Actually, let's right now I want to go backwards, because I know that so many of the people who are looking at Afghanistan right now are kind of feel like the sky is falling, and that this new administration is going to come and it's going to absolutely decimate the SIV program. And I want to talk about the numbers that we know about from the prior Trump administration and kind of temper that Chicken Little, this is really bad, with some facts, some cold hard, you're the numbers man. So tell me what the numbers are from those years.
Absolutely. So first I'll do numbers and in the 45th president, and then we'll talk 47th president, because I think there's also reason for optimism in that. So, I remember I think there was this narrative that we moved no SIVs. And quite frankly, in 2020 with the coronavirus pandemic, that's pretty accurate. I mean, the numbers were incredibly paltry, but I think that's more a function of the pandemic than anything else. Because I looked back to try and, just remember what it was like. In 2018, we moved 1,649 principal applicants. And in 2019, we moved 2,347 principal applicants. Now, that's slightly more than what we're doing quarterly these days, but it was still a pretty substantial amount, especially relative to I think what the narrative is out there. And it's important to remember that I don't know that we had quite the same glut of applicants that we did after the fall of Kabul. So I don't think this idea that none of them are going to move, I just don't think that holds water given what we saw previously. Now, certainly going forward, I look at the exponential gains that have been made, really, since, call it like second quarter, third quarter of 2022, as CARE, the Coordinator for Afghan Relocation Efforts, really got their feet under them. We have seen exponential gains. And again, I just said that we've set, a quarterly record for the third quarter in a row. Our expectation with, President Trump as the 47th president is we just continue to build on that. I mean, we know that standing with our Afghan allies, it's popular. It's popular across political spectrum. Broad swaths of civil society support it. I'm trying to remember which one of our friends, I think it may have been Church World Service, looked at Trump voters from 2020. 70% of evangelical Trump voters supported doing more for our Afghan allies. There was a Washington Post, or excuse me, not a Washington Post, a With Honor and Ipsos poll that looked at support for standing with our Afghan allies. 90% across the political spectrum wanted to do more. So we know that it's a popular proposition. So I'm optimistic that we're going to continue, the gains that were made in the Biden administration in the second Trump administration. And then, I said that, personnel, I think, is a reason for optimism. I'm a believer that personnel is a lot of times policy. I look at some of the nominations, and quite frankly, I'm bullish on them. I look at some of the people that we have. Pete Hegseth was an infantry officer like myself. I know that he knows the importance of our local national employees on our operations. Representative Mike Waltz, going to be the NatSec advisor, a Green Beret that served in Afghanistan, served on the Honoring Our Promises working group in Congress, has sponsored SIV legislation, including expansion of SIV programs to Syria in the past. So I'm a firm believer that he is absolutely going to make the case. And then Senator Rubio is the Secretary of State. I know that he gets it. And so, quite frankly, I am optimistic that the organizations that are responsible for moving SIVs are going to continue it. And look, veterans aren't going away. Civil society's not going away. We're going to continue pushing for this. So, there's a lot of talk about changes to immigration policy. And certainly, I think that's going to happen, but that's a political issue that, quite frankly, is unrelated to this. When we talk about our Afghan allies, to me, it's a matter of national honor. It's a matter of veteran mental health. It's a matter of national security. I think it is totally divorced from some of the other stuff. So, I know we've got a broad tent of people here, and some, maybe a little more pessimistic than others. But I see a lot of room for optimism to continue to stand with our Afghan allies.
Sure. And what I would love to see too, it breaks my heart to watch Afghans try to make that perilous journey that is not a legal pathway here. And I even, to go through Brazil and take that really difficult trek. I had one woman showing me pictures and video of the Darien Gap and getting through, and it just, I had said, don't do this. I care, please don't do this. And, there's only so much you can do when someone feels that their life is at risk, right? And I remember just thinking, this is exactly what I was afraid of. And then, she's made the decision to come in illegally right now because she's worried that there will be no chance. And how sad that we've gotten to that point where people, now she doesn't qualify for SIV. She could have gotten a P1 or a P2 back in the day. I can't remember which one, but the person that she worked with very briefly at USAID didn't send it. It was just a whole thing, but regardless, there are plenty of people who are SIV eligible who didn't want to wait, who felt really, so maybe this could be good for giving Afghans a safer way to get here too. I would really love to see that, where Afghans don't feel so imperiled in their own land because of our choices that they pursue a path that is harmful to them and puts them on unfirm ground in terms of their status and what they have to do to remain here. So I'm all about people who understand this problem set having some say, hopefully, in making
Totally agree. I mean, I think we want to make sure, we have to address the desperation that our Afghan allies are facing, everything from being hunted by the Taliban to the crushing economic conditions in Afghanistan, to fear of deportation from Pakistan or Iran. That's what is leading to a lot of people trying to make these incredibly perilous journeys from Brazil through the Darien Gap up through Central America. I will say I think like the idea that maybe we can, one, improve the programs so that they're not having to do that, but then also get rid of the pull factors that I think have led to people, trying to make that journey. I certainly hope that will have, positive effects on our Afghan allies. And, again, I don't begrudge them for having to try, and avail themselves of those mechanisms, but, we need to do something that doesn't involve, crossing 30 miles of the most inhospitable terrain in the world and having to go through, brutal cartels to try and get to safety.
Absolutely, as we still give money to the Taliban.
Yeah.
Just a little zing there. Yeah, and nobody talks enough, I think, about Iran, and I think Turkey too. Just there are so many Afghans suffering, not just in Pakistan, but I mean, what's happening to them in Iran is inhumane. They're just killing Afghans. Yep. It's brutal, and I think that most of us, I know I don't even have a full concept of the horrors that Afghans are facing right now. So it's really important that we do this for our allies, and that we, I think, try to clean up the mess that we've left. But that's a story for another time. What do you see then being priorities for the SIV program? What are the first things that need to get done off the bat when the new administration takes over?
Well, so before I get to that one, if I could, because this is one that I was going to mention, that I'm pretty excited about, and I actually just looked right before we jumped on the call to make sure it got on.
Cool.
So I'm not sure how familiar your listeners are with the CARE Authorization Act. So I had mentioned the Coordinator for Afghan Relocation Efforts. It's the office that was set up by the State Department, by the Biden administration in the State Department. Falls under the Bureau of South Central Asian Affairs. It exists only because of executive action. So, this is even before the election, regardless of the administration. Honestly, this is something we started working on even before, Biden had dropped out of the race. We said, hey, Congress really should put this in statute. This should be authorized by Congress, and not only authorized under, State Department may have this bureau. This bureau is incredibly important. We look at the work it's done. It should exist because Congress should say, hey, State Department, you shall do this. So the CARE Authorization Act, Representative Titus from Nevada and Representative Baird from Indiana, it basically authorizes CARE for the next 3 years in shall language. So, regardless of whether it was going to be a Biden, Harris, or Trump administration, our belief was Congress needs to put this thing into law. So it has made its way through the House. It has been passed in a really bipartisan way out of committee. The committee's jurisdiction for it is House Foreign Affairs. Chairman McCall, who's been really invested in Afghan issues, brought it up, marked it up, and was amended and passed out of committee. So tomorrow it's actually on the calendar. So it's on the suspension calendar. At the risk again of boring your listeners to tears here, the suspension calendar basically means for items that are not going to be politically tricky, that are not controversial, you can bring it up under suspension of the rules, meaning the House Rules Committee doesn't actually need to pass a standalone rule governing debate. It does have to garner 2/3 support to pass, but we're really optimistic. And just checking House Majority Leader Scalise's calendar for tomorrow, it is on the calendar for tomorrow. We're recording this on Tuesday the 19th, so I'm not sure when this will air, but I really hope by the time it does, it's passed the House. The Senate, unfortunately, doesn't have it as a standalone, so they'll either need to bring up the House's bill. I'm a little doubtful about that because, quite frankly, I think Senator Schumer has a lot of things on his plate that he wants to clear, for the remainder of the calendar year. But this puts it in a really good position to be included in, a must-pass bill at the end of the year, whether it be an appropriations bill. Those are the ones that we were talking about that, carry additional visas. So whether it's a continuing resolution or the 12 appropriations bills, or as part of the defense bill, I think we'll be in a good position. So that's some good news that Congress is working on. We think is really important, and are optimistic that we will have that existing for regardless of the administration.
So let me be a Debbie Downer here and
Please.
say what happens if it doesn't get brought up and passed before the change.
We're still going to push the Trump administration to keep it. I mean, it exists via executive order. The Trump administration would have no requirement to keep it, but they'd have no reason to kill it. And I think it's just very easy to say, hey, listen, it's an administration that prides itself on keeping its word. Loyalty is important. There are, no more loyal people, no more patriotic people than the Afghan allies that patrolled alongside our troops and served our diplomats. So listen, this office has been instrumental in doing it. It's important to keep it. So if Congress doesn't pass it, well, advocates are still going to, demand that it exists because it's been so critical in making sure we keep the promise. Yeah,
absolutely. One of the things I think that has been a detractor for some individuals in Congress that they have pushed back against additional visas or against different programming because I think they're concerned about vetting. Tell me about the vetting standards that our SIV applicants are held. What kind of vetting are they getting?
Yeah, so it is I believe it's 14-point vetting that they go through. Every SIV applicant has to go through it. It can involve biometric checks. It involves biometric checks. Every single one of them involves an interview with a consular officer. Oftentimes there are polygraphs to it. Oftentimes these folks have been polygraphed, multiple times as conditions of their employment. Yeah, so bottom line is so much of this is we were truly vetting these folks every single day. It's just by virtue of their employment. They proved their loyalty, their safety, that they were deserved of a visa to America every single day. That's what they did as by nature of their employment. But then you look at what the State Department, the IC, USCIS, all of the interagency process has in ensuring them through the SIV process that they are in fact that they are qualified. I think a lot of the folks that try and make this vetting requirement, it's a red herring for opposition to it. One of the other things that I think people have brought up, and it's less in the context of SIV, it's more in the context of Afghan Adjustment Act, again, is that kind of vetting standard. One of the other bills that we are really pushing hard on is fulfilling promises to Afghan allies. I think a lot of your listeners are probably familiar with the Afghan Adjustment Act. This is like version 2 of the Afghan Adjustment Act. So this is a version that was negotiated, predominantly in the Senate, but between Republicans and Democrats. It took from a Republican bill. It has incredibly stringent vetting standards. It's the gold standard vetting that relies the same way we vet refugee applicants. That's the standard that we're going to do. And again, so it's drawn from folks that said they have serious concerns about the vetting standards, and we said, okay, great, we'll take your vetting standards to make sure it passes. And so bottom line is it's incredibly rigorous vetting standards, and especially in the context of the Afghan Adjustment Act. If you say you're concerned about who's here and you want to make sure that they're not a danger, well, hell, you got to do something about it. And the Afghan Adjustment Act is the only thing that's going to get done. It's the only piece of bipartisan, bicameral legislation that's out there, that would force people to, get re-vetted, and put them on a pathway to lawful permanent residency. So that kind of went all over the place, in part because, I had a visitor to crash in our office here. But I hope that answered it.
Yeah. It's funny, though, because whenever I talk about vetting and all those kind of cold, it's so important, right? But when you were talking about vetting your own interpreter, all I can think about is Tom Schuman and Zion Al-Azaki. I'm sure you're familiar with their story, and so many of the listeners here, or anyone who follows me on Instagram, I feel like knows Killzone, and it still will never stop hurting my heart for the people who did the service, who were in the shit, who had, their American allies trusted them with their weapons. Yep. Tom got knocked out and he came to with Zach standing over him with his weapon, protecting his life, and because of not being able to get certifications from the CIA base where he worked and all this stuff, it's like he never got his SIV. He's here, and he's had to find other ways to get access to permanency here because we couldn't get him an SIV, and that will always bother me. Or NMRG personnel. There are just a lot of Afghans who gave so much and who still deserve access to that. All of the people who served, in the special forces beside us, who don't qualify for SIV because of, the way that they were. There's It's so amazing that we're doing what we're doing, that we're getting our allies those SIVs, but there just remains a lot to be done. And do you think there's any hope for that with the future administration, that they might, take it upon themselves to push for, the expansion even of the SIV program to include those special forces allies, or even like the USRAP?
Yeah.
Just anything to be able to protect the people who literally were willing to give their lives for us.
So the short answer is I hope so. I will say, with the fulfilling promises to Afghan allies, one of the things it does is in the Afghan Adjustment Act, we did expand SIV eligibility to female tactical platoon, Afghan National Army, Special Operations Command, female members of the ANSF, pilots, Special Mission Wing, humans, Unfortunately, in the FPAAA, we made that argument. It did not get in, but there is a novel, what amounts to a direct access program for U.S. RAP for those folks. So that same groups of individuals that I just mentioned, in fulfilling promises to Afghan allies, it tasks DoD with basically setting up a portal where members of those organizations can apply. DoD will look at their records, and then they'll be able to basically directly apply to the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program, which would be a tremendous benefit. I don't think it's quite as strong a protection as SIV. I certainly think, SIV it's a legal definition that we make. So I don't think that, I would certainly support those groups of people having SIV eligibility. I think they've certainly proven themselves when you look at kind of the close combat that they served in with us. I think they're more than deserving of it. But this is better than nothing. And I think it would still go a long way to have this, P2 direct access program. So I'm optimistic that we can move that. And I realize I just every time I'm with you, I just jump all over the place. So apologies, but one of the things that has me optimistic about the Fulfilling Promises to Afghan Allies Act, so House has passed their version of the NDA. We had some really bipartisan co-sponsored amendments. We had 4 amendments that we supported. 3 of them were in the top 20 most supported amendments of more than 1,500, and none of them got votes, which is bullshit. So we had, 3 bipartisan amendments that were in the top 20 most supported of 1,500. They were all in the top 2% most supported amendments, did not get a vote, were unfortunately ruled out of order by the House Rules Committee.
Tell me about how that happens.
Well, so basically, with the Armed Services Committee, both House is different from the Senate, so we'll just talk House. House Armed Services Committee and then the House Rules Committee basically go through and look at the amendments and determine whether or not they are germane, whether they will get a vote. And if they fall outside the jurisdiction of Armed Services, they have to get approval from the Committee of Jurisdiction. In the case of most of these, the Committee of Jurisdiction was the Judiciary, and they were unfortunately ruled out of order. And so, via party line vote, they unfortunately fell and did not get a chance to get voted on, which is unfortunate, because the thing is, had they come up for a vote, I guarantee you they would have passed with about 70% minimum, probably closer to about 80 or 90%. But that's been the kind of story of this is, despite broad bipartisan support, it just doesn't come up for a vote. So that's what happened in the House. Now, in the Senate. So Senate passed their version. Senate did not actually pass it through committee, I should say. They did not actually bring it to the floor. So it was not a floor process. But they filed what they called their substitute. It's a amendment in the nature of a substitute. So basically an amendment, but it's a whole new kind of bill. As part of that, Senator Rounds, a Republican from South Dakota, again, speaks to the bipartisan nature of this. He managed to get a provision from Fulfilling Promises to Afghan Allies Act in that substitute. So for all intents and purposes, the Senate version of the NDA has this kind of marker. Now, it's not the full Fulfilling Promises to Afghan Allies. It's actually just a provision that touches the Department of Defense, where they have to set up a portal where Afghan allies, the same groups, FTPs, ANASOC pilots, et cetera, where they can submit their documentation. The DoD will then look, check their records, and catalog those folks. So we're going to capture them. That's in the Senate bill right now. But I think that's a great placeholder, and we're making the argument that, okay, great, let's build on that. And as House and Senate conference their bill, let's not just do that. Let's do the full version of FPAAA, because we're about 3 years overdue for it. I mean, this is not something we should be fighting over. in 2024. It's something we should have figured out in 2021. But the fact that that marker is in there in the Senate version gives me a lot of optimism for what's going to happen here in the next month and a half.
How the hell do you maintain that? I mean, this has been 3 years of, it almost just feels like so many bad moments, things not happening. I remember how happy you and Sean Van Diver were, though, with the 12,000, getting that through. That was like one moment of like, yes, hell yes, we saved, you guys saved the SIV program, because without that, there would be 500 left. Not just you guys. You had a group of people who went with you and pounded that pavement, as I was saying earlier. You guys were instrumental in that. But
Sean and I get more than enough credit, and there are
Yes.
truly countless groups that your listeners may be familiar with, but I think a lot of the public is not. There are individual advocates. Quite frankly, it's the veterans that are just calling their member of Congress because they're worried about their specific interpreters. They are far more instrumental than me or Sean or some of the folks that are maybe out in the media as much. Like, they are truly the ones that have made this happen. And I think let that, I hope, resonate for your listeners, which is like, if you guys care about this, I like to think that Congress gives a shit what I say. Realistically, they don't. They care about what their voters and what their constituents say. So with these things, I really hope continue to make the point, continue to call your congressmen, continue to call your senators. That is how all of these things that we've talked about, whether it's Afghan Allies Protection Act of 2023, whether it's fulfilling promises to Afghan allies, whether it's CARE Authorization Act, this shit doesn't get done without you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the amazing thing. I've said it time and time again about all of this. I got involved. I had a very huge passion for Afghanistan that certainly helped me get involved. But it was just, you start one place and you meet these people, and then you meet it's a massive network. I still haven't met everyone. Over 3 years in, I still don't know everybody who is behind this giant machine of Afghanistan advocates, and it's just people who will not say no. But how do you do it? What has been the driving force for you to keep up that optimism and to keep up that fight in spite of all of the doors kind of slamming in your face?
So one, I guess, it's just been intentional optimism. I think Colin Powell's final rule of leadership is perpetual optimism is a force multiplier. And I've tried to do that my entire life, both on Afghanistan issues and others. And I truly believe that. So some of it is intentional. Some of it is also, we don't have a choice. Like, there are, if not me, then who? Well, shit, times are tough. A lot of times I feel like, I think you've used this quote from me before, which is like, I feel like Sisyphus just rolling this rock.
You just outed yourself.
I was going to say, I thought I did that on background.
I gave you that. You were an anonymous source of that quote, but yes, you did say that.
I thought, indeed, I just realized, yep, sure did say that one on background. But yeah, no, I truly do, that is a feeling a lot of times, but hey, I look at when you get the messages you get, when, you're seeing just desperate people, when you're, quite frankly, seeing photos of people that were beaten to death, that were killed by the Taliban, yeah, it's dark. And so sometimes you do have to phone in that optimism, but you don't have a choice, and you just kind of keep pushing through it.
Yeah. Oh, that's exactly my answer. It's like, oh, there is darkness. Let's go find where there is light. And it's really hard with a lot of the other, there's a lot of darkness all around. There's the Taliban. There's the horrible stories that are coming out of this. But then there are the success stories. I saw one of the Signal groups I'm in sent a picture of a young Afghan teenager, and he's taking care of him, and it was his homecoming night. And
That's
he
awesome.
was just, it was like, wow, he came over during the NEO, and now he's speaking English in high school, excelling, and he looked so happy. And that there's baggage there, right?
Yeah.
There's hardship underneath that smile, but that's amazing. That's one person who isn't getting attacked by the Taliban in their home.
Absolutely.
Because of the hard efforts of of so many volunteers. So
If you,
tell me,
one
yeah, go
other
ahead.
optimistic quote,
Yeah.
just because I can't help myself. One of our board members is Doug Livermore, who your audience may be familiar with. Awesome dude on a million different boards besides No One Left Behind, Special Operations Association of America. Really cool Green Beret guy. And I think he has a quote in his signature block, which is like, "If you save one life, you save the world." And I think that describes exactly what you just said. And so, for us, when you do have those victories, as rare and fleeting as they sometimes are, it really does make all the difference.
Yeah. That's I think that comes from the Talmud.
I think it
That's
does.
my good friend always says that to me, because her father is Jewish, and yeah, it has always stuck with me, and I never thought that I would ever do that in my life, that I would change somebody's life, and it changes your life. I would never go back to the person I was 3 years ago. I much prefer the person who has her hair on fire and is trying to solve the problems of the world. I like that version of myself. But okay, now on to No One Left Behind again. Let's refocus to No One Left Behind. Tell me, what are the goods and the bads that you guys are facing here, end of 2024? Totally, politics aside, or politics included, up to you. Just give me the highs and the lows.
Yeah. I'll be honest. I think a lot of the lows are on my end. It's on the advocacy. When I look at we have an incredible resettlement team. We have an incredible evacuation team, and they just do amazing work. And they, help people. And don't get me wrong, like, they have their own kind of frustrations. I know that our resettlement team would love to give more, grants and loans than they do. We always have far more requests than we can service. I know they've done an incredible job of really growing our mentorship program, because, although we can't buy everyone a car, we can really try and leverage American civil society to partner recently arrived SIVs up with, business leaders and folks involved in their communities. Because, look, do you remember applying for your first job? If you've never done a resume, and a resume in an American context, if you don't know where to look for a job, it can be overwhelming. And so, trying to partner up Afghans with, Americans that have navigated that have the kind of economic and social capital to really, get people in, good jobs that provide them economic mobility. That's been fantastic. So that's a high, certainly that we've felt as we've grown that program. For lows, look, we want to move bills quicker. Congress has its own kind of pace of things. That's something that I struggle with, of like, okay, why in the hell has this not, we are 2 months into fiscal year 2025. Beth, why am I still screwing around with trying to pass, fiscal year 2025 bills? That is certainly a sense of deep frustration. But hey, again, I look at some of the wins we've had. Like I said, 12,000 visas in March. There are some really good things out there for our evacuation team. And this is, I think, a lot of the great work that they've done. But then again, speaking to everything that CARE has done, CARE is not without its own sin. The State Department has plenty of issues, but facts is facts and numbers is numbers. And there has been an exponential rise in SIVs issued. So those are the really good things that, to your previous question, how do we get past the dark days? Those are some wins that are out there. I don't know if that answered it, but I think I filibustered at least.
I think that's excellent. And I want to let you have the final floor to say whatever, but I want to ask you about two things that are ongoing that are not through No One Left Behind, but I know IRAP well. And IRAP is working on some changes because, the SIV program still has its flaws, outside of the fact that people who legitimately would have given their lives for us are not qualifying still because of other things. But CSPA and the just the failure to provide people with enough information about their rejections so that they can then reapply. Those are two things that impact people. One of them impacts them substantially less. And I know that if anybody here follows me on Substack, I've written about IRAP's legal battle to change those standards, basically, if you are an Afghan who applied for the SIV program prior to, was it 2022, I think, when they got rid of the DS, whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't quote me on the form. Yeah.
The form.
Yeah.
There was a form that basically your children's age at the time of you filling out that form prior to 2022 was the age at which they would be, if they were under 21 on that date, then they would be eligible to join you and move over. And once 2022 happened, you didn't have to file that anymore, and so it was their age at the time of their initial application for the SIV before COM approval was given. So it helped people, but still you are telling people that, like, hey, we appreciate your service. That was really great. But if your kid's over 21, and especially before, if you had been waiting for COM approval for 4 years, and in that time your child became more than 21, you have to leave them. What is No One Left Behind stance on, that aspect of the SIV program, and is that true gratitude for allies' service when you're forcing them to leave their children in a place where they are going to possibly be killed in retaliation for their parents' service?
So, this is something I told you earlier today that before this, I actually just came from drinks with somebody at the State Department. I'm going to tell you a story that they told me. There was a person that worked for DOS Annex for CIA. They were an SIV applicant. They were awarded their SIV in, I believe, 2018, he said. They decided, despite, being COM approved then, I said awarded their SIV, really just COM approved. They decided to stay. They did not want to leave Afghanistan. They wanted to continue to serve the U.S. mission. They wanted to continue to fight for a better Afghanistan. Afghanistan fell. They then lied about their child's age because their child had aged out because they decided to stay to fight on America's behalf. They were now listed as, it was basically now determined to be fraud because they lied about their child's age, because their child aged out, because they chose to stay and fight for their country and for the Americans that they were working on behalf of, rather than leave. And they will never come to America. So, to answer your question, yes, we're incredibly supportive of changing that. Now, No One Left Behind, we advocate certainly to the public with issue advocacy. We work with Congress, we work with the administration, everywhere from DHS to state to White House. We don't litigate, though. And that is where you had mentioned IRAP. IRAP is an incredible partner, really esteem all of their, both policy folks. Adam Bates, I know you know him well.
I love it.
Their litigators are great. I unfortunately was out of town, but there was just oral arguments that my deputy went to, and IRAP, not surprisingly, killed it, and the U.S. government was rebuked by the presiding judge. Certainly,
for the CISPA, right? That's the one I heard
correct.
About that. I heard that it was pretty strong.
Yep. And so that's one where, we thank God for them. Some of the senior advisors that we have at No One Left Behind have filed amicus briefs for those IRAP lawsuits. So we certainly support them in all of that. And I think, the changes are absolutely desperately needed. And thankfully we have, great partners that are fighting in another branch of the government.
Yeah. And I know you and I have chatted about, for anybody who hasn't followed that, because obviously podcast Beth and writing Beth are slightly different, but I've been covering this since I first heard about it, all of these batched denials and revocations that Afghans were getting with little to no answer as to why, and it took people who do the hard work, who started to put that image together of, wait, hold on, these people all share common recommender, or these people all have the same employer, or there's been a growing understanding of why some of this is happening. Obviously not all of it, but that led to IRAP's other thing, which actually goes back long before the COM revocations, the blanket denials, that these letters, and I've been receiving letters, as I'm sure you have, since the fall of Afghanistan, from people saying, here's, your comm was denied, and the answer of why became more and more sparse over time.
Yep.
You did not provide a valid letter of recommendation. Well, why wasn't it valid? How does No One Left Behind feel about that whole debacle? What needs to happen from the SIV program in terms of, telling people why they are not accepted? Because the appeals rate is high. If the appeals, people get come on appeal all the time. So it's really important when you're doing that you understand why you were denied. I want to hear your, the organization's take on that whole debacle too.
Yeah, so I think there are a couple things in there. Firstly, they just need more information. Like you need to tell them why. And I think you owe it to them, if there are employers that you're saying are, blacklisted, and I'm sure the administration and State Department would push back on that term, but
yes,
you know what? I'm going to use it, so too bad. So, if an employer or recommender is blacklisted, like, they deserve to know that. They can't just be, they can't know, okay, yep, I have looked through every single detail in the letter that I submitted is correct. I know it's correct. I know that all of the other documentation I've submitted, matches with it, and it keeps coming back, disapproved. That is incredibly frustrating and confusing. How the hell do they know? One of the other things that I would mention as part of that, a lot of the issues that I think the government would call fraud. Like, is there fraud out there? Absolutely. And I'm a firm believer we need to sniff it out. I don't begrudge the Afghans that are desperate that try and find some mechanism to get here. I don't begrudge them, but listen, they're not SIV eligible. They're not SIV eligible. I certainly hope that any Americans that write fraudulent letters, knowing that it's fraudulent, especially if they're trying to be, predatory and are charging Afghans for it, I hope that the Justice Department goes after them with the full strength of the law. But we have to also recognize this exists on kind of a continuum here. There are cases where, an Afghan got a letter of recommendation, and they knew that their cousin would also be SIV eligible, and they said, hey, here's a copy of my letter just so you have it as a template so that you can go to somebody that you worked for as a recommender. And that cousin may have been a knucklehead and gave it to his neighbor. And that neighbor just said, okay, I'm going to change the demographic data and we'll just submit it. And that letter is now into the wild. Well, guess what? The first applicant didn't do anything wrong. And maybe there were other original applicants that didn't share the letter with anyone, and now they're being caught up because, the State Department's position is, okay, we know that this letter writer, there are fraudulent ones out there, and therefore, we can't accept it. Well, I just don't buy that. A lot of the folks that are, that the State Department believes have written fraudulent letters, they're written by American citizens, some of whom have clearances, some of whom work for the government, many of whom are also just raising their hand and saying, hey, I want to talk to the State Department. I will go line by line on all of the recommendations that you have with my name on it, and I'll tell you who's legit and who's not. And, those American citizens are saying that in a time where, there was a guy in Florida that was a Navy commander that just got sentenced to federal prison. There was a guy in Hawaii that I believe was a State Department contractor that just got arrested. They're still raising their hand and saying, listen, I want to talk about these. I want to tell you who's legit and who's not. That's not something that someone that has committed fraud wants to do. And so the State Department really, look, I get it. There are a lot to work through. There are very serious, national security concerns that we have to address. But, we're just not doing it. And quite frankly, more transparency, not less, is the way to get about it. And actually talking to the, recommenders and the companies that provided the HR verification, that's what they need to do. And quite frankly, it's just not happening. We're not seeing it if it is.
Yeah. There is an immense lack of transparency, I find. I used to be able to get answers from the State Department about things, and I just struggle now. And I feel I've made myself, persona non grata. But it is angering to see so many people appear to be so maligned because their letters, when they send them to me, just say, here's this random thing. And I'm like, what? Why? I don't understand, but I've seen 100 of these, and you start to, more transparency would be helpful for all the people.
Was it August or September that they responded in a moment of rare candor to you? Yes. I imagine that was. And now that's they are that's living to regret that one.
They're at the end, yeah. That was I think what was able to finally be shown that, hey, if one person, if a letter is found from one supervisor, all of them are gone now. And that is absolutely against the SIV program, right? The SIV program is you're evaluating the applicant based on their merits.
Yep.
So that has nothing to do with their recommender. Their merits and their recommender are two separate issues. Now, if they, like you said, if there is fraud, if whatever, we need to get eligible Afghans, right?
Yeah.
That's the most important thing. So if there is fraud, that should be on there. Then when somebody sends me their letter, if it says, we detected fraud in your SIV, I'm not going to sit there and spend hours spinning my wheels trying to go back to their employer saying, can you help? But here's the thing, most of the time it's not that. It's, oh yeah, this person worked for us, but it was on an Afghan government contract, so that doesn't qualify for SIV, even though 80% of the Afghan government's salary came from the U.S. and international donors.
Don't even get me started. I mean, that's the thing we run into with FTPs and ANISOC that bugs me to no end. The national strike units, because they were paid directly by CIA, they're eligible, but the FTPs that were doing similar stuff, ANISOC that was doing similar stuff with Tier 1, JSOC units, well, no, because they were paid by the ANA, who was paid by the U.S. government. Like, it's
especially the FTPs. It's like, come on, didn't you look at this and go, that's a woman that we convinced in a country where 20 years before she never could have done that. We convinced her to do that. And now, I mean, I remember when I first started covering these issues, Ben Owen was telling me about, Afghan national police women being raped by the Taliban as, recompense for their sin of working for. So it's just, once you start hearing that, you kind of lose your empathy for anything that isn't immediately helping people. I don't know. But I love the State Department at the same time because they have done amazing things. I never want the State Department to think that I consider them an enemy. I don't. The SIV program needs immense help in a lot of
100%.
ways.
And I am very sympathetic. You heard me say, listen, they've set records that cannot be understated, and you look at, the folks that actually just make up the rank and file of the State Department. They're incredibly dutiful. Some of the most hardworking people you can imagine. They are absolutely amazing. Yeah. I think there are things that the State Department can be doing better that they have the current authorities to do and they're choosing not to. That is not indicative of the rank and file. I think many of them would like to see some of the changes. And quite frankly, some of the things, they're maybe a little reticent to do them because quite frankly, Congress needs to fix things. I mean, look, the Afghan SIV program is a Frankenstein piece of legislation that has evolved over a decade and a half. And, look, it needs serious statutory reform. Congress needs to play its part. And so I'm incredibly sympathetic to, what the State Department, really the whole of the USG has to go through.
Sure. Yeah. And I mean, I'm seeing it from the personal level, right? The people suffering and struggling with various things. They're seeing it from the immense bureaucracy level of, you have to finish this many cases and you have to do this many, we just are seeing it, I think, they see it from an even more intimate side in a lot of ways, though. Yeah. So it's interesting, I'm being plied with the emotional side for the purposes of, media reporting. And I know people who send them emails every day just saying, get me out of this hellhole, I'm dying and I want to die, or I'm going to commit suicide if you don't help. I mean, the things that they have to, I don't think I could handle their workload right now. And I would love to get somebody from state to come on and talk to me about just what the last 3 years have been like for them, because I imagine it is also very hellish and, from a totally different perspective. So if you're watching from state, that's your open call for for coming on, blacked out face, totally disguised voice. And well, okay, what else, Andy? Do you have any other things that you think need to be addressed right now that I haven't asked you about? That's like my constant end of interviews question in like my writing world, but I never ask it on the podcast. So
yeah,
I'm asking you, what else?
No, I think you really did hit a bunch of things that are out there. I don't know if this is the final question, so if not, I'll give one plug, which is, look, I said, legislators care more about what you, the constituent, thinks than what me, the professional advocate, thinks. Continue to pound them on, all of the needed reforms. For No One Left Behind specific plug, come visit nooneleft.org. If you want to get involved with our advocacy efforts, if you were just so enthralled by me squawking numbers at you for 5 minutes, sign up. We have something called Partners in the Promise. It's not our normal No One Left Behind newsletter. This is Andy Sullivan and my deputy, Sonia Norton, just squawking facts and figures at you. So if that sounds exciting, come sign up for that so we can be in your inbox, once or twice a month for really, truly more kind of in-depth policy stuff for ways that folks can really have, current, kind of detailed, somewhat more esoteric calls to action. So certainly come do that. And then also, if you want to get involved with No One Left Behind, I talked about the mentorship program. That is where, talking to volunteers and mentors, I think that's something that really is impactful for them. So if you want to get, truly involved with recently arrived SIVs, sign up to be a mentor. If you want to help work to get folks evacuated, sign up to be a volunteer. If you want to see people, put in cars so they have economic mobility, please think about donating. So we'd certainly welcome you visiting us at nooneleft.org.
Oh yeah, I love it. There are so many ways to help, and yeah, I hope that some people take you. I know I've had people ask me about the mentorship program, and I hope that they did come to you. I can't remember who did, but I know that people did. So
awesome.
Everybody go do something for No One Left Behind today. My act was this.
Penance. Yeah.
Oh my God. Yeah. Oh my God. My old Catholic upbringing is coming back. Okay. So this is a very lengthy letter, and there are some things that I have to excise from it that are personally identifying details. But it's emotional. So, this individual asked me to use their full name, which is something that has been happening a lot lately for me. And I think it's because Afghans are in a point of just not caring anymore. And I know that that is the case for this person, but I told him I wasn't going to use his full name. I'm just going to go with his first name. I hope this email finds you well. My name is Tahir, and I'm the president of, and I'm not naming his company either. I would like to take a moment to introduce our company and the work we've undertaken. Our company had the privilege of working with the U.S. Army on various rehabilitation projects throughout Afghanistan, particularly in the eastern provinces of Kunar, Laghman, Nangarhar, and Nuristan. We specialize in the construction of public sector infrastructure, including water and sanitation systems, schools, hospitals, roads, and other critical infrastructure projects. Our company has been recognized for its commitment to quality and ability to successfully complete complex projects in challenging environments. As a result, we received appreciation letters from the Jalalabad Provincial Reconstruction Team, including from, and there's a variety of names that I will not be naming. Many of our projects were carried out within American military compounds, often in high-risk areas. These projects were particularly challenging due to security concerns, but our team successfully navigated these difficulties to deliver results. We also provided logistical support to coalition forces, and worked on about 12 forward operating bases. These projects, conducted in partnership with the U.S. Army and in some of the most challenging conditions, required careful coordination and dedication. Working within these high security areas created significant challenges for our management and staff, but we successfully met these obstacles and delivered high quality results. And this individual shared with me pictures and appreciation letters that prove their efforts. I have recently recovered from my psychiatric problem due to the incident I faced a few months ago in Afghanistan in May. For my quick recovery, my doctor told me to not discuss or share the above incident with anybody. That is why I am informing you a little bit later. I left Afghanistan, came to Pakistan for a safe life and facilitating education of my children and then I never went back to Afghanistan because of my enmity with the people in Kunar who belong to the Taliban. In 2013, our company signed a road construction agreement at a FOB and PRT, and he names the awardee of the contract, etc. The Taliban used to conduct several attacks, and as a result, a few of our staff members were kidnapped. The Taliban claimed that we had been working with the U.S. Army, which was an anti-Islamic force. They killed our above-mentioned project staff. We did not stop our construction works of the project, which resulted in pushing us to their wanted blacklist. Since then, we have been receiving potential threats, because at that time, the present governor of the district was involved in the killings of our innocent personnel. I reported these criminals to the U.S. Army, and after the collapse of the previous regime, the concerned Taliban had given us many life threats. After the takeover of their regime, the Taliban are in high positions in their government setup, which increase their power to manipulate us and threaten our lives. You know, I have submitted an SIV application to NVC, and I had to get tazkira and passports for my children from the current de facto government of the Taliban to further process my application. That's why I, along with my family members, visited his native district to find the situation was not favorable for me. And early in the morning, I came to Kabul and met with suspicious staff members in the directorate of the passport office. They took the national identity card from me first and then referred me to the intelligence department for further investigation to find out who I was. They released my children the same day in the evening, and they went to the home of my relatives in Kabul City. For your information, the Directorate of Passports is in the capital, and they did not issue passports to my children. The intelligence department contacted the current governor in my home district, with whom I have enmity. I totally refused and told them I was not the one who was wanted by them. My colleague, gave me his company license and approached in some other way to give money and not give my name to the governor. The intelligence department kept me for 2 days in their custody, physically tortured me, and forced me to confess that I was the person who was wanted by them. They also took my national identity card and my personal belongings, including my phones, and dropped me in one of the streets in Kabul City at midnight in the month of May 2024. I took a taxi and went to my relative's home in Kabul City, where my children were waiting for me. I left for Pakistan the next morning via the Turkmen border and reached my home in the evening of May 12th. Then I fell sick and was in anxiety and have recently recovered from my illness. I just wanted to let you know about my story, which my family faced. Yeah. That's the kind of story that I'm sure comes into your inbox too, Andy. I feel like it deserves some commentary just because it's long and clearly, I mean, I have the contract numbers here. I've seen the letters. And I don't remember what happened to Tahir's SIV. I'll be looking that up. But I'm sure those are the kinds of stories you're seeing at No One Left Behind.
It's, terrible and not unique. It is unfortunately all too commonplace.
Yeah. I mean, forcing people to go get...
Yep.
I remember that in the beginning days, covering those people who, especially anybody who had their fingerprints on file, and they were just terrified to go to get passports out and to be identified. And yeah,
Do you know who issues passports for the Taliban? Like what department?
I thought it was the Taliban. I have no idea. No.
It's the MOI. Do you know who's in charge?
Oh, nice. Siraj's MOI. You gotta love it. Are you fucking kidding me?
Yeah.
Oh shit! Yeah, that's just sick. Well, but Andy, Siraj is a vaunted humanitarian, according to
he's a counterterrorism partner too.
Yeah, he's
stacking ISIS bodies for sure.
I love some. Okay, well, I really appreciate Tahir taking the time. That was. I wish there was more I could do. These are the stories that make me just wish that there was more. That is a frightening circumstance. I would not go back to my home either.
Well, thank you for being there to push rocks up hills with me.
Yeah, I love it. I'm a big time rock pusher all the time. I want to thank all of the listeners who stuck with us and listened to. It was a very important. All the numbers are so important. They're all people. And I think that's the most important thing. We've come full circle talking about the big group of people and now one of their stories. So thanks for doing it with me, Andy, and thanks for doing everything you do. No One Left Behind just does such important work. Thank you all again. Follow the YouTube page, enable the notifications, all those things that you're supposed to say if you host a podcast. And Tasha Kaur, and hope to see you again soon.